Hi there, my name is Neil Blevins, and this tutorial is called Using Keywords to Define a Visual Design. So while sketches are super important when it comes to a visual design, don't underestimate the power of the written word. For example, if I'm going to design a character, writing its bio can be super helpful when it comes time to do those first sketches. But even a full bio can sometimes be distilled down to a few keywords or design pillars that define the look, and it may be enough of a springboard to start those initial explorations. So when coming up with the final design for Ink the Robot for my first book project, I used keywords to help define the most important elements of the character. And whatever new design was going to land needed to have those elements to be successful. So I'm going to discuss those keywords and then show how those ended up influencing the design exploration of the robot character. So first things first, here's a bunch of different designs for Ink the Robot. Now this was a later stage of design, so a lot of fundamental things had already been decided, and this was more about mixing and matching elements to try to find the perfect balance of all the things that made the robot what it was. So let's move over to those keywords, which I have written up here. And so one of the big advantages we had before doing the final Ink design was that the story of the book was already written. And at its core, the story of Ink was a buddy comedy, and the human protagonist, Landis, was afraid that he would be a bad father to his unborn child. And without giving too much away of the plot, in case you haven't read the book, Landis buys Ink the Robot for a different purpose, but Ink the Robot's true role in the narrative was to be a proxy child. So basically to give Landis some experience dealing with a child before he had to do it for real. So therefore Ink's design had to support this narrative. So when coming up with keywords, we can start with the obvious appearance-based ones, which are down here. And that is, Ink was constructed to be a welder robot, and so the design needs to have a construction feel to it. And he's also been used for years and years on a desert planet that has plenty of storms, and so he needed to be kind of rusty. And then the remainder of the keywords here are mostly focused on him being a child. So he needed to look innocent and wide-eyed. He needed to look a little awkward, kind of like a big baby who's taking his first steps. And we wanted the audience to fall in love with him as a counterpoint to the gruffer Landis character. And so we wanted the reader to just want to give him a big hug on his big belly. So we won't be going through all of the design iterations, but let's focus on a few of them that were my favorites, or ones that really show off the use of keywords. So all of these rough paintings are a combination of photo bashing, bits of 3D, and some hand paint. And close up they all look pretty crude, but that's fine. The idea was to get the general picture, and then whichever one I chose as the final design was going to get a much more detailed version for the final book. Also, I'll be discussing a few other design considerations beyond just the keywords, since that might be helpful in showing you some of my thinking when it came time to choose the final design. So as well as my own opinions, I also got opinions of what are sometimes known as zero-gravity thinkers, which means you show it to some people that you trust to get their initial impressions, but they don't know anything about the project itself. So the idea is that if there's some design choice you make that you want it to be really obvious to the reader, you show it to somebody who has never seen it before and see if they see it immediately. And if they don't, that can help shape the design itself. So here's design number 2. And this was among the favorites of the people that I showed it to. So first, his design shows off that he's some sort of construction robot. The orange color is part of that, but also the big vents here on his chest, and also the exposed wires and pipes. And he also has this flip-up mask, which is common for human welders to wear. And so this was an element that ended up in all of these final designs. Also, all the iterations had these big eyes, which is one of the first deals over here. So we got the welder aspect with the hat and the construction feel, and then he has these big, giant, wide eyes. And the big eyes is a pretty common design trope to denote a character as a baby or a child, and it might be overused a little bit, but it works really well. So that part never changed on the designs. And all the iterations also have these short, stubby legs that you can see here. And that was all part of making him look kind of awkward. Like, he's really top-heavy, and the first time that he decides to walk, he might just, fall over. So that's got the first steps part right there. So other attributes that were popular on this guy was his backpack, which was here. Because the backpack is so large, one person I showed the design to said that it really felt like the robot was some young kid going to his first day of school, and he was wearing a backpack that's a tiny bit too large for him. And then the flip-up welder hat also helped with this, because it almost looked as it was like the rim of a baseball cap, which is another design choice that makes him look kind of childlike. So just to finish off the list here, you have sort of that innocent, wide-eyed look to him. He does have a bit of that kind of big baby look because of his proportions and awkward shape. The child aspect with the backpack and the hat. He does have a certain huggable feel to him, although not as much as some of the later designs you'll see in a little bit. He does have a big belly, and the textures, of course, on him you can see are rusty. So all the next designs have some similar elements to them, so I'm not going to focus on those elements, like for example the big eyes. Instead I'm going to focus on the things that are different. So this is design 3, and design 3 is a little shorter and stubbier and wider, which makes him even more top heavy and hence a little bit more awkward. He also has a big belly, which makes him huggable, and you'll remember that design 2 he was kind of square, and while you could certainly hug a square, square has sharper corners, which is not as huggable as something that is round and cylindrical like this. So this one really ratcheted up the huggable aspect. So you can also see the gas tank on his belly here, and then the big gas tanks that are back up here on his back. And so those gas tanks are something that you'd very commonly see in a construction equipment or a welder or something like that. So this showed off that element more. So the welder aspect was stronger on this one than some of the others. But one practical problem with the design was that the head would have trouble turning left and right because of its position here. And that was one of the reasons why this design ended up not getting chosen. So design 6 showed more exposed wires and pipes on the lower part of the body. And he also had the big belly, but not as big as in design number 3. And also, again, it was more square, so not as huggable. And a bunch of extra gas tanks were added to the chest, so they're far more obvious. Hence, the welder thing is even more obvious in this one than the other ones were. And another design element I liked on this was on the upper chest you had these sort of white and then the orange parts here. And I kind of like that rather than design 2, which was just purely orange, because it gave some contrast, which made it easier to see the head. And so that was an element that ended up working in the final design. So when doing designs, it's always important to take some elements and just, push it to 11, just to see where it brings you. So design 7 was really going for the awkward, big belly, huggable keywords. So the chest idea was inspired by a giant boring machine. And he was definitely very huggable, but it was pushed so far that instead of just being kind of awkward, I felt he was kind of ridiculous. Like he would just absolutely fall over. And that's the reason that this guy ended up not being chosen. And then also to note is the positioning of the head here. Again, it would be really hard for him to look left and right. And so that was another reason why this design ended up not getting chosen. But important to try things out just to see whether they'll work. So design 8 was the closest to what became the final design, and he was kind of the compromise. So he exemplifies all of these different keywords, but it was always sort of like the halfway of everything. So, he was awkward and had a big belly, but he wasn't like quite as awkward and big-bellied as this guy, for example. So design 9 was taking the far too plump design 7 and seeing if it could still work if he wasn't quite as wide. And one thing I liked about this was this gave him this kind of egg shape to him here, and that works really well with the child keyword because an egg is something that hatches usually to have a baby bird inside. However, it also gave him a bit of this hunchback feel, which was certainly awkward, but it might repulse people a little bit too much, which would make him less huggable. And so that was the main reason that he ended up not getting chosen. So design 13 was going for a taller and thinner design. And while his original design was kind of a trash can with arms and legs, I thought this one was kind of interesting because it looked a bit like a mailbox with this sort of semicircle helmet and the flip up top. So in the end, it was decided that the mailbox was the wrong move, and that was because people kind of looked at it and immediately laughed. And he wanted people to see the design and kind of go like, "Aw," in order for him to be huggable and, childlike. And instead they would laugh because it was like, "Oh man, that guy looks totally like a mailbox." And then the other thing was that this flip-top welder mask really looked like the mail slot, like that was opening up and you'd stick the mail in his face. And that meant that this looked far less like an actual welder's helmet, so some of the welder aspect of him disappeared. And so those are the reasons. While it was a neat idea to try, it wasn't the right design for the robot. And here's the final rough design before he was modeled in 3D. And you can see that basically I used design 8, but then added his welding gun to his back, which gave him a bit of that boy with a backpack feel from design number 2. And so this guy, if you go down the list here, all of these aspects are present in him, and some of them, are maybe pushed back a little bit, like he's not quite as huggable because he is square. But it checks all the boxes and does so in a way that I felt balanced all the elements in a pretty successful manner. So next time you're doing a design, try writing down 5 to 10 keywords that show off the pillars of the character. And then when looking at your sketches, use them as a checklist, not just to make sure that all the keywords are covered, but that there's also a good balance between all the different attributes. And this short list will really help you make a cleaner and more readable design, and I hope it becomes an important part of your own design process. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this interesting. Please visit my website at neilblevins.com for more tutorials, and also feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to be notified the next time I post a video. Thank you very much.